Good day, Spartans. Happy Monday, June 6th. You may have seen me in the building today. I was in the building for first hour, but we've had three boys make it into the sections final for boys golf. Thus, I'll be out of the building in the afternoon. I'm going to have to miss hours 2 and 4 today to go coach those three competing in sections today. The plan is still the plan. You are watching this video to wrap up the last bit of new information for the school year, and you will have your final. Just a couple of notes. You'll have some information to write down that you'll want to write down ahead of the exam, depending on what hour I have you sometime this week. With whatever missing or whatever remaining time that you have in the period, I don't think this video will take all that long. With whatever time you have remaining, you have a few things to do. One, you want to submit this reading guide. No reason to go half credit on this because you didn't get it in on time. First thing to do would be to submit this reading guide, and then whatever missing work you have, you want to make sure you get in. I noticed that there are a lot of missing video guides from last Friday. The chapter 30 reading guide, get that in, and then whatever missing assignments you have. I will take your missing work up until the end of your testing period. So hour 1 tomorrow, hour 3, check that, hour 4 Wednesday, hour 2 Thursday. We still have a little bit of time to get some missing work in. There are some assignments that you'll be able to submit on Schoology. Obviously, those are still good to be submitted on Schoology. If there is a reading guide that you need to submit that is prior to the 4 or 8 week deadlines, you have to show me those in person. And again, I'll look at those up until the end of the hour that you are taking your final exam. For your final exam, remember that you do get to use a 3x5 note card. You get to write on both sides. Those are on my desk. So again, when we're done with the notes today, you have several things to be doing. Submit your chapter 30 reading guide, work on any missing assignments. Reading guides prior to the 4 and 8 week deadline, I will still look at. You have to show me those in person since you can't submit them. And then you have a 3x5 note card that you can work on for your exam. Testing schedule, pretty straightforward. Tuesday is first hour, Wednesday is fourth hour, Thursday is second hour. And with your unit final, there will also be a current events extra credit quiz. All right, let's get back into the impact here of World War II. Again, your book is kind of walking you through this timeline. You obviously need to understand the timeline. So you need to know the battles. We need to know Atlantic Charter. We need to know appeasement. We need to know those things. But we're also looking at it from a 21st century perspective. So if we look at the United States getting involved in World War II, we need to look at the Atlantic Charter, because this sets the stage for the United States. This lays out our role, our mission when we get involved in World War II. It also sets the stage for, the last 80 years. The United States gets involved in World War II for economic reasons, right? You can talk about collective security. You can talk about the disarmament of aggressors. You could talk about democracy and freedom. But there is a major issue that needs to be stressed as to why the United States gets involved in World War II. And it is for free access to materials and trade. You have to remember, World War I, the United States had a booming economy. Then the war stopped. So the demand for our goods went down. Soldiers returned home, needed jobs. So now we have a flood of labor. Wages go down. We want to run into one systematic economic problem after the other. FDR realized that if the United States was going to get involved in this conflict, that would cause a significant economic shift and set the stage for a significant economic problem if he didn't have an end game, if he didn't have an end plan. The United States was going to get involved in World War II, yes, to stop the Nazis, yes, to protect freedom and democracy, blah, blah, blah. But it was also to protect our very fragile economy. By 1941, we've already spent 12 years in a depression. We weren't going to go into war and then come back to a depression. He wanted to make sure that the areas that we were fighting in, the countries that we were fighting against, the countries that we were fighting for and with, all around the understanding that once this conflict is over, we're going to have freedom. We're going to have free trade. We're going to have freedom of the seas. We're going to be able to move goods in and out of countries. We're going to be able to buy and sell both resources and manufactured goods. The whole point being, we needed to be able to keep, everyone needed to be able to keep demand for goods high. So factories and businesses had a reason to keep people employed. So factories and businesses had a reason to hire returning soldiers from conflict. So wages were stayed up. If wages stayed up, then people had money to spend. If people had money to spend, both here in the United States as well as around the world, then economies kept growing. That was the major point. The United States gets involved in World War II largely for economic purposes, on top of, you know, all those noble things like freedom. A major result from World War II is the Holocaust. The Holocaust comes in 3 stages. The first is restrictions of Jews' laws. The point of restricting Jews' laws, an example, the Nuremberg laws, the point of the restriction of laws, or rights rather, the restriction of rights for Jews was to try to drive them out of the country. But no one would take the Jews. You know, the United States has this famous story of the St. Louis. There was a yacht, or not a yacht, but a cruise liner filled with Jews that basically stopped several times up and down the East Coast of the United States. They wouldn't let them disembark. They wouldn't let the Jews off. The ship returns to Europe, and I don't know, more than half of them die in the Holocaust. No one would accept the Jews. The United States FDR spent several years trying to buy land in South America to give Jews their own country, but no one would want them. The Nuremberg laws were to restrict the rights of Jews to drive them out. Because no one would take them, the Nazis then transitioned from restricting their rights to concentration camps, kind of isolating them from the rest of society. When it turned out that, you know, things weren't looking so good for the Nazis near the end of the war, that is when they kind of transitioned to what's called the final solution, which is the extermination of them. Things were so egregious. You guys have covered the Holocaust before. The Holocaust was so egregious for the Jews that, you know, the world really realized that these people need their own place. It doesn't matter where they've been. It doesn't matter if they've been in Poland or France or Germany or Russia or wherever. They've always been kind of oppressed and persecuted, which is why they give them, that's why they establish Israel. But what's unfortunate and where World War II doesn't have an impact is there's been several examples of genocide after the Holocaust. Rwanda and the Hutus and the Tutsis, Iraq and the Kurds, Yugoslavia, the Serbs and the Muslims, Sudan, Christians and Muslims. Currently, right now in the 21st century, the Uyghurs in China, and in Myanmar, the Rohingya, ongoing genocides. But the world typically doesn't get involved in these. And this is because after World War II, and especially after Vietnam, there is this sense that countries aren't going to get involved in a conflict unless it specifically and genuinely affects their economy. If there's going to be if there's going to be a threat to their economy, then countries will get involved. Typically in these genocidal situations, there's no economic influence. Thus we don't get involved. Not just the United States, but the rest of Europe. I mean, China has one human rights crisis after the other when it comes to genocide, yet no one really says anything because China does most of the manufacturing. Again, these are all impacts of World War II. We really start looking at things from an economic perspective. After or near the end of the war, we have conferences where the Allies sit down and kind of lay out the plan for the rest of the post-war world. You know, the Yalta Conference, all right? Soviet Union agrees that it's going to get itself involved in the Pacific once the European theater is over. The United Nations is going to be established. The Germans are going to be divvied up and occupied by the Allies. The most important thing right here at the bottom, democratic governments are going to be established in freed areas. The people are going to have a choice in their government. Right? Potsdam. This is after FDR passes away. Same thing. Germany's divided and occupied, war criminals and tribunals for people who violated the law. Okay. Germany is more or less going to be forced to exam. But there is this recommitment to free elections and democratic governments. And this goes right back to the Atlantic Charter. The United States isn't going to get involved in this conflict unless there's an economic gain to be made. Now, we know what happens after World War II. We know that Eastern Europe gets controlled by the Soviet Union, and there are not free elections there. Those elections are tilted in the favor of socialist dictators who are satellite nations of the Soviet Union. This is what plays into the conflict for the next 50 years that plagues the 20th century. It's the Cold War. We have a distrust with the Soviet Union, and it is all economic based. They agreed to free elections. We wanted free elections. If these countries who had free elections wanted to do business with the communists, great, perfect, no problem. But we wanted a fair shot at economic trade in Eastern Europe. They didn't provide that. They staged elections. On top of it, the United States never told the Soviet Union that we had a nuclear bomb, which we dropped 2 of them on the Japanese, while the Soviets were in close proximity because they agreed to invade Japan. They agreed to get involved in the Pacific after the European theater closed. These 2 things caused significant trust issues between the United States. And again, it is largely economic. After World War II, there's one communist country in the world, the Soviet Union. After World War II, the United States is worried about going into an economic recession, just like they did after World War I. Stalin is trying to survive. Truman is trying to keep the United States in a very good, comfortable economic position. Now, whether or not free elections, would have changed anything, I don't know the answer to that. I don't think many people know the answer to it, but it probably could have relieved at least some of the hostility between these 2 countries. But it's because there was so much running economically on the line that the Cold War starts. Yes, it's about communism, and yes, it is about capitalism, and yes, it's about nuclear arms. But the whole emphasis of this goes back to economic reasons. Atlantic Charter. The United States understands that free trade, the exchange of resources, the exchange of material, manufactured goods is essential for their ongoing success after World War II, so they don't go into a recession. This all changes. This all changes when the Soviets more or less control the elections in Eastern Europe. And Stalin's going to argue that, being the only communist country in the world, they need protection. They need a buffer zone, which is why he goes in and more or less stages these elections that guarantee a communist dictator will be elected. But that is a threat to the United States because that cuts Europe in half. That cuts half the markets that we could be selling products to. That also cuts half the markets that the Soviets could be selling to. There could have been a competition between the 2 countries economically, but that isn't how it worked out. We also need to point out this is exactly what Putin is doing. You can see what Eastern Europe looked like after World War II. You can see the Soviet Union and their 15 Soviet republics went all the way up to Romania, Poland, all right, Czechoslovakia. He is definitely pushing west into Europe. The reason why, beyond uniting Russian-speaking people, he wants a buffer zone. He wants a buffer zone from what are the NATO countries, Western Europe. He wants the Russian mainland, the Russian homeland, to have a little bit of a cushion in case there is some sort of military operation that is carried out by NATO, which really doesn't make any sense, because if it was, it would be by rocket, it would be by air. Wouldn't necessarily be a land invasion, at least right away. But anyway, we need to understand the economic impact of World War II. Okay. Beyond the battles, beyond the bombings, beyond the dates, we need to understand that the distrust between the communists and non-communists, the United States and the Soviet Union, is the main impact of World War II, because it sets the stage for those two countries to compete for territory, for people, for land, for countries in which to sell their products, in which to continue growing their economies. Because they know, and we've covered this extensively, if countries' economies do not continue to grow, there will be some sort of revolution or at least electoral change in that country. Remember, missing assignments, chapter 30 reading guide needs to get turned in. Video guide from last week, which somehow some of you have not finished, needs to get turned in. Then any missing assignments I will take until the end of your test date. So I will see you guys tomorrow. Golf will be done today, Monday. Won't be anything else the rest of the week. Even if we have kids make the state tournament, that'll be the following week after school. So if you need something from me, feel free to send me an email. But get ready for your test. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you enjoyed your weekend, and I'll see you tomorrow. Go Spartans.